Welcome to Dock Chat, the podcast that brings you the stories of the unique community of people who work, live and play in the historic Dockyard, Chatham. In this episode we hear from Phil Webb, volunteer museum guide and researcher. In addition, we preview a very special event, Mission Christmas, and also take a look at the extensive Dockyard collections. First we hear from Phil with some great naval stories.
I retired early from teaching after 30 years. They were changing the way it was all organised and I really wasn't interested. So as soon as I was able to, I retired. That left me with the problem of what to do because I was frightened of becoming just another couch potato. I'd always been interested in military history of one sort or another, although actually mainly the army really. Well, I visited the Dockyard, and perhaps having lived on Sheppey for 30 years, I got a bit more interested in the Navy. So eventually I volunteered to join the CDHS, the Historical Society, and that's really where I started as a volunteer. I do 2 days in the museum as a guide and information holder. It was when I started the Museum of the Royal Dockyard. It's now called the Steam, Steel and Submarines. It has 2 sides to it. The routine is greeting the visitors as they come in, all the hello sir, how are you, have you ever visited before, and all that sort of thing, and guiding them round the exhibits and what's in there, and also asking general questions, not unusually having to explain to people that although it's called Steam, Steel and Submarines, it is not HMS Ocelot. They've managed to walk straight past that big black submarine and not even realise what it was and send them back to the ship's area. More interesting than that, though, is dealing with inquiries from people about their relatives who are in the Navy or in the yard itself. The yard workers are difficult because there is no database anywhere of all the yard workers. All the departments get their own information. There doesn't seem ever to have been a central register of who was involved here. There may have been, but I've never seen it if there is. That gives us all sorts of problems with finding them, and even when we find them, usually all the records will tell you is when they started work in the Dockyard, what department they worked in, and when they left. If you're really lucky, they'll give you some information on pay rates. Only if they were involved in something unusual. You might find a record of them in the medical records, the sick and hurt books, something like that. But otherwise, there's virtually no record of anybody. The RM people are much easier to deal with because they have a comprehensive set of archives going right back to 1853. Most of it is now available on the National Archives website. After 1928, they are still confidential. They're still some sort of a state secret. But if you are a relative, if you can prove you are a relative and they are deceased, you can get hold of their records. All the sailors, of course, were given a copy of their records when they left the Navy. It's called a certificate of service. And that details their service in the Navy, every ship they were on, every day, every promotion they had, every demotion they had, every time they were given a badge for good conduct, every time they lost a badge for good conduct. And unfortunately, they never explained why they lose the badges. Although 1 or 2 relatives have told me it was probably because they liked the rum too much. The most interesting ones you get are ones you can connect to the Dockyard. One of my favourites was a lady who was most impressed that her several times great-grandfather had served on HMS Gannet. She wanted to know what it was like, go and have a look. And she was even more impressed to discover that in the 1890s, he and his mates had captured an Arab sailing ship full of slaves and freed the slaves. She was really quite impressed with that. He got paid prize money for the ship. I also got landed with an interesting one when an American museum contacted the Dockyard and said, well, we've got this model of HMS Ajax of 1760 and we'd like to know a bit more about it. So we looked at the photograph of the model. It was a 28-gun frigate. HMS Ajax was a 74-gun liner battleship. So something was wrong somewhere. I eventually managed to track down that it was a frigate called HMS Currysford, which had been built down at Sheerness. When the Command of the Oceans was being organised, I joined the researchers group looking into the families of the workers of 1803, and I've been with them ever since. We research our own interests and anything that the Trust wants us to investigate. I did try to look into the career of HMS Ocelot for her history. If you look at what's publicly available, all she ever did was goodwill tours round the British Isles and across to America. That an awful lot of her logbooks have not been lodged in the National Archives. So what she was really getting up to, you'd need a much more skilled researcher than I to find out. Just after that, I was looking into the history of a submarine called HMS Seal. She was interesting. She'd been built at Chatham. She was a mine-laying submarine. She was the only Royal Navy submarine to surrender to the enemy during the Second World War. She'd been caught in very shallow waters and depth charged to the surface, badly damaged, and then attacked by a surface force of German ships. She had no alternative but to surrender. There have been other things. I recently looked into attempts to hide the yard during the war to decoy Germans away from it. Very interesting stuff, mainly done with lights and mirrors. There's a myth that they hid the three basins by spraying them with coal dust, because coal dust doesn't reflect and therefore you wouldn't get the image on photographs. And it's totally untrue. They did try it, but the trouble is, as soon as the water starts to move, the coal dust drifts to the side. And then you get this very deep black outline. I've seen photographs of it. You get a very deep black outline with the basin glinting in the middle. You might as well shine a searchlight on it. They didn't actually do it during the war. Something else I've looked at is the whole field of deception. Not a lot of people know that the Commissioner's House was the general headquarters of the 4th British Army during the Second World War. The reason they don't know it is that the 4th Army existed only in the minds of certain British intelligence officers and the German intelligence officers they were conning. That army stayed there right through to the end of 1944, with the Germans still waiting for us to land yet more troops round the Pas-de-Calais, and they were holding their troops there so that they would be able to fight us off. One of the intelligence officers responsible for that, you may know his name, was Ian Fleming. At the moment, I'm doing some personal research purely on the ships built at Sheerness, and I'm concentrating on the period during the Napoleonic Wars. I don't know if anyone's ever going to use it for anything other than me looking at it for pure interest. I'm finding it very fascinating. We built the ship that proved to the Admiralty that propellers are better than paddle wheels. It also built the ship that in 1714 brought over the first Hanoverian king, George I, to take the throne after the death of Queen Anne. And that really is it. That's what I spend my time doing, and thoroughly enjoy myself doing it.
Come and visit our magical Mission Christmas and experience the brand new festive adventure where your children graduate as an elf apprentice to become part of the Elf Academy. As one of Santa's helpers, the family will also meet Father Christmas, where he will bestow a special gift for the valuable help provided. Mission Christmas runs from the 24th of November to the 24th of December and is a separately ticketed event. All details and online booking via the website. The Dockyard is now closed to the public apart from specially ticketed events. The Dockyard reopens to the public in time for half-term on the 8th of February 2025. The Dockyard has extensive collections extending to in excess of 70,000 items, ranging from archaeology, rigging, hand tools, machinery, to fine art and photography. These are gradually being digitised with new objects added regularly. To find out more about the Dockyard and the collections, visit the website, which is easily accessible by typing Historic Dockyard Chatham in your browser, or if you want the website address, it is thedockyard.co.uk. That is thedockyard.co.uk. We are now on 11 podcast platforms, including Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, Spotify and YouTube. You can either visit any of the 11 podcast platform websites or download their free apps from the Google Play Store or the Apple Store. door. If you have enjoyed our podcast, please hit the subscribe button and you will be sent a notification whenever a new episode is added. To contact us about the podcast, please email us at podcast@chdt.org.uk. That's podcast@chdt.org.uk. So until the next time, this is John saying goodbye and take care.